Greetings, welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, and we're going to continue our paint making project. So the first thing that I want to do is make some putty. Okay, so we're going to make old-fashioned painter's putty. This is what would have been used for your old-fashioned oil-based glazing putty. This would be house painter's putty. Remember, back in the day, the reason red barns were so common is because rust is common, right? And your paint was linseed oil and something to turn it from a penetrating into a film finish. So if linseed oil is going to be the base for our paint, it ought to be the base for our putty too. So this is your old-fashioned painter's putty and window glazing putty. And it's very simple, 2 ingredients. We have our diatomaceous earth, which again, I measured all of the diatomaceous earth, I mentioned this in the previous video, outdoors so that I'm not exposing myself to the silicon dust in here because I do not want white lung. Bad news bears. So this is just, the solids in here is just straight up diatomaceous earth, nothing else, nothing fancy. And we're going to pour in a little bit of, actually, let me have that glass, that jar back. I handed you a minute ago. I lied, I'm sorry. I said I didn't need this, now I need to ask it back. This is just, I don't want to make a big mess. So I'm going to pour a little bit of my linseed oil into another vessel. Again, remember, everything that ends up contaminated with this needs to be treated as flammable. The safety warning is that all forms of linseed oil are a potential spontaneous combustion hazard and should be treated as such. So I want to make as little waste as possible. I'm just going to pour a very small amount into here and stir it in. Again, I do not want to raise dust. So I'm just very slowly, very carefully working that little splash of linseed oil into here until it's taken up all it can. First a little bit more in. Might have been too much. The smallest amount possible. The more your mixture favors linseed oil, the softer and weaker it will be. The more your mixture favors solids, the stronger.
The linseed oil is in.
Move the linseed oil?
Yeah.
Ah.
I can't see.
Yeah. The more your mixture favors solids, the harder and stronger it will be.
Move the jar.
Move the jar. You move the duct. Okay, there we go. Can you see everything now? Yeah. Okay. So I want to add the absolute smallest amount of oil possible. Just barely enough to stick it together and give me a kneadable, formable paste. And I think we're there. It should be difficult to mix the oil into the dry. It should fight you a little bit and be a little hard to get that last little bit of dry out. Okay? There we go. And that's our putty. You can see I can pick it up, I can form it, I can play with it, I can knead it, kind of a Play-Doh consistency. And this is going to be our final filler for any gaps around the head of the duck. Or any other useful thing you would want to do, right? This is your old-fashioned oil-based glazing putty. It's just that simple. The other material that that you can use instead of the diatomaceous earth for this is ground marble dust. That's the other one that's historically common as a non-coloring solid binder. And I mean, you can see all the color here. The diatomaceous earth looks white, but it's really colorless. Okay, so the color that you see is the color of the oil itself. This won't dilute the color of your paints. If you want a colored version, then you need to chase that down in there. If you want a colored version, then you need to add a pigment to it, along with the diatomaceous earth, which you absolutely can do. So there is our first recipe. Now again, I've got oil on this, I've got oil on this newspaper. All of this is going directly in the burn barrel, and I am going to, or into the fireplace behind me, I should say. And I'm going to light it up, watch it burn safely under controlled conditions. Okay? That's my strategy for dealing with the potential flammable hazard of this material. It wants to burn, I'll let it. On my terms, not its. Okay. So that's our first thing to make is the putty. Second thing we want to make is a heavy body medium. Heavy body medium. I'm not going to talk about painting techniques here, but you want heavy body and light body mediums. The rules for painting oil on top of oil wet, and there are times in painting these ducks where you want to have multiple wet things at once, is fat over lean, fast drying over slow drying, and thick over thin. Right? So fat versus lean means how much thinner is in it. So you want something with less thinner on top of something with more thinner. You want something thicker on top of something thinner. And you want something faster or slower drying on top of something faster drying. Now, all of my paints are the same dry time because it's all the same base. So how I manage that last one is I just let the lower coat dry for a while. So it has a head start. Same effect. But we want more than one thickness of medium as we're going forward. So to make this heavy body medium, again, we have some diatomaceous earth. Okay? I'm going to make 20 ounces, which is that line right there at my finger, 20 ounces of total medium. So I want 8 ounces of loose diatomaceous earth, 2 ounces, and I'm just using this as a volume measurement, not a mass measurement. 2 ounces of beeswax. Okay. It's going to leave me approximately 10% beeswax. More than 10% beeswax and you get a solid at room temperature. Okay. There we go. And I'm just using the marks on a canning jar for this. This doesn't have to be perfect. If it's a little too thick, you can always add more oil. If it's a little too thin, you could always add some more solids. And that's going to give me approximately half solids, half oil. Approximately half solids, half oil. And none of these are glossy solids. So this is going to take down the shine rather than raising it. If I wanted a varnish, I could do the same thing, but instead of diatomaceous earth, you could add some sort of like lac bug secretions or some sort of varnishy material. And then I'll do this way in a little bit more control. Fill it up to 20 with the oil. Okay, we're not quite all the way there. Pour myself out a little bit. Again, this is a nasty mess to clean up and a dangerous mess to clean up. So go. The more I can keep my quantities small, the cleaner and safer and happier we're going to be. Okay. And this is where we would get into Danger Town, right? If I were to take this mess that I have and put it in a plastic bag, it'd burn the house down. Guarantee. 10 out of 10 times. So we'll fill her up to the 20 mark. Okay. So we've got about yeah.
8 ounces.
Yep.
Diatomaceous earth.
8 ounces diatomaceous earth, 2 ounces beeswax, and the rest up to 20 with, 10 ounces of the linseed oil. So 2, 8, 10. That's your ratio. Mm-hmm. You could do this 2 teaspoons, 8 teaspoons, 10 teaspoons, right? If you wanted to make a smaller batch. And that'll give you a very nice gel type medium. Now, this will not just dissolve as is. This needs some heat. Okay? So to actually make this and make this work, I will need to put this on the stove and heat it in a double boiler. I'm not going to do that here on camera because I have one that's finished. Okay? Heat it up to a double boiler and then let it cool down. And then we can use this to make medium. Now, I'm going to make a departure here from what an art teacher would tell you to do. I'm going to make a very simple medium. The first one I want to make is a gray undercoat for my canvas back. I want a medium gray. The painting method here is comb painting, so it's off-white over medium gray. And then you comb through the off-white and it leaves a little bit of a shadow mark down there, which kind of gives some definition to the feather pattern. But it's white on gray, it's not white on black like the mallard I had out in the earlier video. So we want to make a medium gray. And I'm going to take my titanium white, start with most of it. Also, having it be a little bit off-white and gray, this looks white, even though it's a very light gray. And if you remember from the video that came before this, and I'll put a link up at the top of the screen, if you want to go and watch it or rewatch it, if you found this one first. I talked about your mineral pigments being part of what's going to catalyze the hardening of your oils. Well, titanium white is the weakest catalyst of all of these. Of everything I have out here, the iron is the strongest catalyst. So the iron black, like what's on his butt, and the just straight up raw umber, like what's on my black duck there. The iron content will help it dry faster. So that's also a reason to want an off-white. Plus, nothing in nature is truly white or truly black. So you want it white enough that people say, oh, that's a white duck. But you don't actually want it white. You don't want it like typing paper white, or it will look weird. So that's also why the black duck is painted with raw umber instead of black black. The reason I use black black here is because I want that to contrast with the raw umber on his beak, to see that his butt is darker than his beak. Okay, now we want to make a gray. We're going to make a gray with the raw umber. Put a little bit of that in here. And then mix it up and see where we are. Are we looking gray? Do we need, obviously need more of one than the other. Ooh, that is very, very dark. Kind of crush up the lumps a little bit. Now, here's where I'm departing substantially from what you would get if this was a fine arts channel. If this was a fine arts channel and we were making paint put on a canvas, you want it absolutely smooth. Right? So the instructions would be to take this and grind it with what's called a Mueller, which is kind of a flat, it's almost like a mortar and pestle, but instead of putting it in a mortar, you put it on a flat plane of glass, and instead of the pestle being rounded on the bottom, it's flat. And you work that back and forth and crush all of the lumps out. I don't Mueller these. And I don't Mueller these partly because I'm not painting on a canvas. I'm painting one color at a time. So if I get a little lump in the paint, I don't care that much. I can just crush it out with the paintbrush as I'm working it around. I'm just painting big patches like that. So if there's a little lump, you can just kind of rub it out with the paintbrush. The other is, you don't want shiny ducks. If you're making these for hunting especially, you don't want shiny ducks. And having a little bit of texture residual in the paint, that looks about the kind of the medium gray I'm going for. If you have a little bit of texture in the paint, the fact that there's texture in the paint will help prevent it from glaring if light hits it right on. Okay? So I want a little bit of texture in these paints. Now, to make the paint, we're just going to add some liquid linseed oil. And I want a substantial excess, here's what's already dirty. I want a substantial excess of the liquid linseed oil because I don't want this first coat to be a film finish. I want it to soak in and have just enough pigment that it kind of acts as a stain. Because if I make this a film finish, then it's going to clog the pores and the second coat won't soak in at all. It's just going to sit there and dry on the surface. Right? So I use, and the wax that's in this heavy body pigment will do that a lot. It will just sit there, and if you use this heavy body pigment as your base coat, your second coat will not sink in at all, and then it comes up as a higher gloss. Okay? So I try to keep painting these ducks to 2 coats, and the first one I want to be a stain that will still allow a substantial portion of the oil from the second coat to soak in. So I want this to stay runny, and that's what will make sure it will soak in. I'm actually going to even use a little bit more oil than that. Okay. This is just supposed to be, that'll work well. This is just supposed to be a linseed oil finish that's pigmented, so it's the base coat. Okay. That also means that it won't chip off. So if the paint gets scraped or chips down to a lower level, it will chip down to something that's an appropriate color that I put there as part of the paint job anyway. Okay. So that's the simple, just a real simple way to make a paint. I'm literally just stirring a good quality pigment into the linseed oil. Now, normally, and also talking about safety, normally I do all of this outside. Right? I do it there. We have a table that's outside the wood shop. And whenever I'm doing something nasty, dirty, yucky, I do it out there. And then I don't have to worry about any kind of cleanup, right? Or hazards with any of this sorts of stuff. Walk in on the way in the house, throw this in a steel barrel, and what spilled on the table, meh, doesn't matter. I oiled my wood table. So what? No big deal. Okay? It's the middle of winter, and I'm filming this, so we're doing it here under nicer ambient conditions, but it does mean that I have this hazardous mess that I've got to incinerate carefully. So, That's making paint with the, an example just with the thin. Okay. I also want to make a batch of this greenish, these black ducks has sort of a dirty green, dirty yellowish green kind of beet color. So I'll show you a batch with the heavy body medium, which is always my second coat on the duck. And we're going to, the base for this is going to be raw sienna. Now for a mallard beak, I just use straight up raw sienna. That's it. But the black duck beak has this dirty green color. So we're going to add a little bit of this chrome oxide green. You don't need a lot. This is a very, very opaque pigment. So we're currently mixing. The sienna is fairly transparent. The green is fairly opaque. I do need more than that. Oh. Okay. A little more yet, but I don't want to use up all of that. Where's my box of pigments go?
Oh, back there.
Back there. There it is. I want to goose this along a little further. I'm going to use some of the ultramarine blue in there. This is a good mixing color. So obviously the blue on the mallard wings, that little blue patch that they have, it's a very good mixing color. This is artificially made, and it's a very strong blue, but it's also very transparent. We're getting in on it there. I want just a little bit more of the green. A little bit more. I like to do this dry before I add the pigment to it to guess, get close. But at the same time, you're only going to be getting so close because the color will change a little bit when you mix the medium in. So there we go. Now we're ready for the medium. I want to clean off the spoon. That one has some of those pure, really strong colors on them. So, this is what I use just for mallard head green too, just straight up. Now this we're going to, it's a paste. This is our wax and diatomaceous earth. You see, it's not a paste that's sculptable with your fingers, but is a very heavy body paste. Okay. So put some of that in. darkened a lot. It's pretty close to the shade that I want, but I'm going to lighten it with a little bit more raw sienna here and maybe a little bit of the white. But you can see where we're going with it. Okay? Sometimes the colors will fool you. This came out a lot darker once I put the medium in than in the original. So I darkened it a little bit too much with that blue. So I am going to go in, I'm going to put a bit more of the raw sienna, just kind of tinker with it. I am not a trained classical artist in any way. Can I get another spoon, hon? I don't want to put anything, I need to get a little bit of white. I am not a trained classical artist, I'm a wood carver. So I'm sure somebody out there is watching this and cringing, oh, you're doing that the hard way. If that's you and you're trained in color theory and all the classical art stuff, leave a comment. I'd love to know how to do this more directly in terms of the color mixing. But the chemistry is sound. So I'll just kind of keep tinkering with this until it comes up the shade I want. And I have done this before where it gets way too off and it's like, okay, start over, just use a spoon of this in another jar. That's always sad because I don't like to waste the pigment, but there's a point of no return with some things. But you can see, I think this just needs a little bit more yellow and a little bit more white. We're fairly close there. Okay. And when I paint those, it's an undercoat of the yellow and then a top coat of this, so the yellow shows through a little bit anyway because everything in here is transparent. Transparent colors. So we have light body paint, we have heavy body paint, we have heavy body paint that will cook soon, and we have putty. And that's our basic repertoire. Now if you want wax in your paint, one last thing I'll tell you that you can do. If you want wax in your paint, but you want it a thinner consistency, you would take this and just make a batch of this, scoop out a teaspoon, put it on a palette, and then mix in turpentine. Okay? And then that won't change the chemistry of your paint. It will still leave a nice film finish. But the turpentine will literally dry by evaporating quickly and leave you with that film, but you've still been able to use it as though it was a light body medium. So that's the last ingredient. I don't have need to do that. I have not tinkered with that much, but it is certainly a thing that you can do in making these sorts of paints. So it's a little bit of a mess. I do recommend doing as much as you can outdoors, but it's a straightforward mess. So, okay, if you liked and enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up so it can spread to other people, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.